Okay, well, this is the Living Library, and I am here with Ray Lightheart. So, those of you who have been following along our adventure on exploring integrity, you'll recognize Ray as part of our group. And this is just a reminder as well that anybody watching these Living Library conversations, watching this one as well, you can redeem an hour. This is going to be an hour conversation. You can redeem 1 hour as a service that you are providing for the time bank, and that is you can use that hour later on and receive a service from someone else within our network as we go along on this adventure. So Ray, as I had said before I started the recording, a lot of these conversations are kind of developing a spiritual theme, talking about spiritual journeys, understanding what really perked my interest in the last couple of days was a post you did, a TikTok post you did, kind of about how spirituality or religion is often leveraged to kind of keep control over the masses. So I definitely want to get into that and talk about that in a little bit. But just tell me a little bit about your background, your upbringing. What has your spiritual or religious experience been like so far?
Yeah, wow, there's a lot there.
It is a lot there, yeah.
So I was raised in an evangelical fundamentalist Christian home. Um, my dad was an aspiring pastor,
Mhm.
and my mom was the choir director, eventually worship leader. We kind of had different roles because we were at so many different churches growing up.
Mm,
A lot of it was characterized by sort of criticism of different denominational views
mhm,
um, within Christianity. So I don't remember what my dad started out as in seminary, but eventually he kind of shifted from that and went into a different direction. And I was sort of just along for the ride, as a young child growing up.
mhm,
Um, I would say that I don't remember not being a Christian. I never had like a conversion moment that kind of bothered me growing up. I was baptized as an infant, and at some point, I ran into some very lovely Baptist people who were convinced that I was not saved because I hadn't been baptized of my own free will, but because
mm,
I had been baptized at birth. And so I went through that, and I don't know, I basically was navigating a lot of denominational differences in like theology. So I went pretty deep.
mhm,
And I think compared to a lot of my the people I grew up with, I took it very, very seriously.
mhm,
At many points in my life, as I was growing up and thinking about what I wanted to do, I thought about being a pastor myself. I thought about just going into ministry in some way. I thought a lot about being a missionary. That was a very serious consideration for a while. Yeah, I was very into it.
mhm,
And
mhm,
I've always just had that desire to learn. And that desire is kind of what led me out as well, which
mhm,
I find fascinating looking back,
mhm.
saying like, how did I do that? But essentially, yeah, I'll just leave it there in case you have a specific question, or I can continue if you want.
Yeah, the first thing I wanted to do, because there's a convergence here in a couple of our lives and our stories with exploring integrity. But the first question I wanted to ask, what were some of the most prominent differences in the different divisions that you noticed? And then I definitely want to hear more about what led you out. But as you were
Yeah.
growing up with the different denominations, what were some of the contrasts or some of the differences that were most prominent, from your observation growing up?
Yeah, the one I remember most was the difference between Christians who believe that the gifts of the Spirit are no longer happening and that people don't have them. And I don't know if people are familiar with what that is, but it's essentially like speaking in tongues and being able to heal people.
Mm,
Those are just some examples of the gifts of the Spirit, and that God is no longer speaking. So, like,
mm,
the scripture is the only word of God, whereas other more kind of Pentecostal leaning denominations are much more like, no, the spirit is still speaking and the works are alive and we can still do those things. So my parents kind of went through the revival movement.
Hmm.
And so yeah, people kind of speaking in tongues and falling over and that sort of thing. So we kind of went down that road for a while. And then eventually made our way back to Presbyterianism, was kind of like home base, I think, and particularly Calvinism. So this other kind of thing that was huge in my theological understanding was the difference between, free will and not having free will. And John Calvin was taught that, predestination is a thing, and the people who are meant to be saved will be saved, and the people who aren't, well, they won't. And then Arminius was the like free will kind of theologian who was all kind of like the father of the Baptist movement, I guess. That's like, yeah, anybody who wants to be saved can be saved. And you can also, lose that salvation. Like you can just decide that you're not going to be a believer anymore. And then guess what? You're not saved anymore. So that was kind of the two different camps that I was exposed to. And I was definitely a Calvinist.
Wow, I'm learning a lot just from just from what you just said over the last couple minutes. That's awesome. That's awesome. Just noticing those differences. So what led you out of it? What was that experience like? What tell me the story of how you got out of it.
Yeah, so I was pretty obsessed with the idea of God and who God was. And I noticed that pretty much the definition of God was like God is love, right?
Mhm.
And there seemed to be a little tension between that and some of the stories about God, particularly from the Jewish text,
Mhm.
the Hebrew Bible, and versus like, compared to the story of Christ and like who Christ was, and that it just seemed very contradictory. So that was like there, right? And everybody kind of knew about that, and sort of, I don't know, just like explained it away. Like, well, there's three parts to God, and like there's, and it all kind of just fits into one, even if it seems to be contradictory. It's really not. Um, and then I stayed with my aunt for a few months because she had hurt her leg, and I was just a teenager, was homeschooling. I was like, yeah, I can help out. So I went and lived with her in Asheville, North Carolina, and just helped her out. And she was not a Christian, and I was very concerned about that, because I was worried for her salvation. Like I was like, I love my aunt and she's so great, and I want to make sure she goes to heaven, right?
Mhm.
This is during a time in my life where I was pretty involved, like very involved in like evangelical projects, like missionary work to children, where I would be like teaching children about Christ and like leading them through the salvation prayer and all of that stuff. So, yeah, I started talking to her about Christ and like sharing with her. And this was not new for her. Like she had dealt with my mom, who was her sister, and like her parents, like, and now she's hearing it from me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she was very gracious and kind about it and just said, it's not that she doesn't believe in Christ. She's like not a religious person and she thinks Jesus was great. And love is all you need. She's very,
Mhm.
I mean, kind of what people think of as a hippie. Like she grew up in the
Mhm.
70s, and yeah, she was just like, just love people and that's all that matters. And I couldn't argue with her. I was like, I mean, she's kind of right though. Um, and it really like stuck with me. I was like, I don't, I just can't believe that like God would send somebody like my aunt to hell. Like that doesn't sound like love to me. Like that doesn't sound right.
Right. Mhm.
Um, and because I was a Calvinist, it was like, well, it sounds even more wrong that like God would make all these people and then like decide who he's gonna save and who he's not. And like that just sounds kind of
Mhm.
sadistic to me. Like that doesn't sound like love at all.
Right. Right.
And so Calvinism, in a way, was part of what led me out. But before I got all the way out, I went down the road of, well, maybe there's free will. And,
Mhm.
I kind of went on this journey and I talked to a lot of people. I found theologians like Rob Bell had written this book, Love Wins.
Hmm.
right around that time, and many of my fellow Christian folk were adamantly against this book,
Hmm.
like just hardcore. But I had been listening to Rob Bell for a while, so I was excited about it. And all of a sudden, it was like people were talking about hell. People were talking about how hell is not eternal, and like dissecting the words in Greek and Hebrew, and like figuring out, well, this doesn't actually mean this. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, so I was part of that. I was like really in there with all of that, and like, wow, see, I'm not the only one questioning these things.
Good.
Um,
Hmm.
yeah, so that's kind of how I made my way out. Um, and I would say that it was, there was a lot of years when I was like 17 to mid 20s where I was still trying to like rescue the church or like reform the church or change it. I was like not ready to completely let go. I was like,
Hmm.
like I'm still a Christian, but like I don't think they think I'm a Christian because I don't believe what they believe.
Right.
But like
Hmm.
I still felt like this really strong connection to the community. And I tried going to like Unitarian churches and
Hmm.
things like that. But yeah, so that's kind of how that was kind of the process there.
Hmm. Yeah. And you've been through quite a journey just in the last couple years since I've known you, at least maybe 4 or 5 years. Can you bring everybody up to speed where you've been, over the last couple of years here? Because you're on quite an adventure right now as well too.
Yeah.
Yeah, can do you mind walking me through what the last 5 years of your life has been like?
Yeah. Um it's hard for me to think about it in the last, like, in terms of five, like the
Yeah,
numbers.
yeah,
Um everything like kind of starts to blend together and it's
yeah.
like, wait, when
I
did that happen?
experienced
When did
that a
that
lot
happen?
too. Yeah.
Yeah, but that would have been within the time frame of my children being born, because my eldest is 8. So I remember that when Rowan was born, my ex-husband and I did go to church, and it was my idea. I was
Mhm.
like, I want to go to church. I want to find something that works for us. Um, and increasingly, I found myself sitting there, listening and thinking like, wow, like they haven't made any progress. Like this sounds almost exactly the same as it always did
Mhm.
for me, like growing up. Like there's nothing new happening here. Like,
Mhm.
and I just started to feel really confused about why people were still doing that. Like, why are people still here doing the same thing that they're always like? There should be evolution, there should be growth, there should
Mhm.
be change. Like we should be going somewhere, we should be shifting. Um, and it wasn't happening, and life happened. Like
Mhm.
eventually it was just too much to take one, if not two children every Sunday to like
Yeah.
get up at a certain time and like
Mhm.
be presentable and all of like it just wasn't going to happen.
I'm feeling that more
um
and more after my daughter was born. Yes.
yeah, yeah, so the effort just wasn't worth the return, I guess, that we were
Mhm.
getting. And so yeah, we did our like church shopping thing and then we sort of stopped. um and I It's hard to say that this began there because I had already been exploring like new age spirituality for a while. I was a Waldorf teacher, so I was involved in this thing called anthroposophy that was very Christian, but also very Hindu, very Eastern religion, like the chakras and the etheric forces and the astral and like all this stuff, right? That you really only hear about in new age circles for the most part. Um, and so that was like a big kind of undercurrent that was like, this is happening simultaneously as I'm exploring. And in I'll speak for myself, but in my mind, like the framework of like how the world is and what reality is very connected to spirituality because as I was growing up, I was told this is how the world is because this is how God made it. So there's no separating in my mind like spirituality from the way the world is or like a worldview. So I basically have to fit everything in that framework. Like, does it make sense? And also, like, there's a lot of openness for me about like what could be, like possibilities, because none of us knows. And I know that because I went through this and like I figured out that I was wrong. And I'm like, well, nobody's right. That's for sure. Like, I don't know if you remember that Simpsons episode where they're like, it was the Mormons. Or no, it wasn't the Simpsons. It was that other show, South Park. I don't watch these shows, but I see the clips. And it was like the Mormons were right all along. And it's a joke, right? Because nobody knows. Like, um, and does it matter? Like it sort of began to matter less and less to me who was right, because like it just doesn't matter. Um, which like my previous self would have been like, but it does, because you'll like spend all of eternity in hell. But like I don't believe that anymore. So then it's like, well, you know, what is the point, right? And so as I was learning and studying and like I started getting into anthropology and sort of going down this um I don't know, like philosophical road of like trying to understand why humans even try to figure out these things. Um, and so what I came to was that people just need things to mean something. Like we just want to make meaning. That's like what humans do. And we don't, for whatever reason, that's like part of our humanity. I don't know if other creatures do this. I don't know if cats or dogs are trying to like make meaning out of everything. I don't see any evidence of that, but I could be wrong. It seems like to be a very human thing that we're like, well, I saw, you know, a blue bird land on this particular tree and at this particular time, and it's a sign of something, you know? It's like we just feel like we need to do that. And so I started to just feel like, well, whatever means something to you is valid, and whatever means something to me is valid. And it's really just about your own connection to yourself. And if you want to call it source or the divine or the universe, this connection to all that is. Um, and then this understanding that, like, I believe in unity of all. So like some would say that that's I think it's in alignment with what scripture says about like God is one. But I think that we are God and everything is connected and the separation is just an illusion. So what we do with that and how we interpret our reality is like super personal. And I don't think anybody has a right to say like, well, you're wrong about that, because that's their belief. That's their reality. Like that's what they experience.
Yeah. Yeah. And how has that journey or that spiritual journey kind of changed the people in your life, the where you were at then, as opposed to or as compared to where you are at now. So what was that journey like? Because you are living. Are you in the yurt now?
No, I'm in the farmhouse. They have
Okay.
reliable internet here.
Okay, very good. Very good.
um,
Yeah, so
yeah.
so yeah, because that's something I've been watching for, last couple months as well too, is that
Hmm.
that transition of your environment and that
Yeah.
the emergence of that. I'd like to hear more about what led to that change. That the being at the time being married with kids, and then bringing you to the present state where you're at now, and the people in your life. So
Yeah,
if you don't mind sharing, I'd love to hear the kind of like the evolution or the journey that happened there.
for sure.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I think that for a long time, I basically was looking outside of myself for guidance and truth and like what should I do with my life. Um, I didn't really consider looking inward and asking myself like, what do I want? What do I want to do? Um, until I was a young adult. Um, and I wasn't very good at it. Like I wasn't good at understanding what I wanted. And so I feel in some ways that because I was so like, oh, not I, but Christ is in me, and I don't have an identity, and I'm just gonna do whatever God wants me to do. Like that was literally um my whole life.
Mm,
And then I'm like, but wait, I'm a person too, and I have like unique interests and desires and like things that I want to do with my life. And there was this tension there because well, okay, so there was this huge thing that happened when I was 19, which is that I came out as gay to my parents.
mhm,
I was with a woman for 5 years when I was in college,
mhm,
and my parents essentially were like, not like you're dead to me, but like we're not going to support you financially because you're in this lifestyle that we think is sinful, right? And
mm,
they felt like they would be enabling me in a sinful life if they paid for anything.
mm,
And what that did is it put me in a kind of desperate situation.
yeah.
um, so I had to, in order to not be homeless, I had to move in with a family that I nannied for, who is a wonderful family, and I don't regret it. But it's just like the context in which it happened was very much like I need a place to live, so this is the only option.
Yeah.
Um, it was either that or like, tell my parents they were right and like live with them, which I guess I could have done. But it was like the first moment in my life where I was like, no, I'm choosing something for
Yes.
me. That's like,
Mhm,
this is my truth and I'm not going to compromise.
mhm,
So that was a big step. And I did that for a few years. I was nannying, and then I couldn't do it anymore because I was studying to be a teacher and I had to do
mhm,
student teaching. So my partner at the time paid for that, like literally supported me financially so that I could do all the things that I needed to do. And as soon as I had a job teaching, I wanted to essentially like take the next step and like get married and have a family and do all those things that we have been talking about doing. Um, but my partner at the time was not out to their parents.
mm,
They were living with their parents and very much in the closet and not
mm,
just not willing to go through what they had seen me go through, like losing their family. So, from there, I was like, well, it looks like we want two different things. And since I was no longer financially dependent on them, I had a job of my own. I had a place, I had an apartment. I was like, I think we need to just, split up, take a break, whatever it is we need to do.
mhm,
And so we broke up, and I shortly thereafter um, started a relationship with my ex-husband who had been my friend and confidant for a while,
mm,
and so I felt very close to him, and I think I was needing some like emotional security or financial security, even like feeling like I need to get my life together.
mhm,
And it was also a time where I realized, like, not consciously but certainly looking back, I can say subconsciously, that I knew that I saw a path opening up where I could have my family back and I could make a family of my own and I could do these things that I had dreamed of as a young person, like having a family. It's literally what I was trained to do, right? I was told, you're going to be a mom and have kids and all of those things. So I was like, yeah, this sounds like a good idea. Let's do that. And
mhm,
so I got married. My parents paid for the wedding. Of course, they were very happy that I was
mhm,
not gay anymore.
mm,
Um, and it was strange because as I shifted into that whole different life, I moved from Maryland to Virginia, like literally just across DC. I
mhm,
was sort of in the same place. Um, like that whole DC metro area is very connected, but it felt like a whole new life. It felt like I was in a different place and meeting new people. I started a new job, but it was still within the Waldorf system. So like there's different Waldorf schools. There's like three
mhm,
different schools there. So I was working at the one in Virginia, very different people, very different energy. Um, and my ex is in the army. So I was familiar with the army because my dad had been in the army for quite a few years. So I just sort of like took that on. I was like, oh, I know what to do. Like this is very familiar to me. Um, but I noticed along, and we were married for 7 years, and in that time, we had two kids, and I was primarily at home with the children. I opened a daycare. I did all these things, and through that whole process of parenting, and children, they always teach you more than you teach them. So they were kind of like showing me how to be an authentic person, like how to be yourself, because
Mhm.
children just come in like being themselves.
Yeah.
Um, and like adults to some extent kind of teach them how to not. Like, let's just not. Let's do something else that's more acceptable or appropriate or whatever.
Yeah.
But what they were teaching me is like, it's okay to be yourself, and like how beautiful it is to be an authentic human. And I was like, oh, okay, like let's try that. And so, at the same time, I'm like exploring astrology and like getting into human design and doing all this other stuff and
Mhm.
trying to figure out like who I am. And in that process, I kind of feel I start to like question my gender identity. And I'm like, oh, I think that I'm like, I don't really feel like a woman or a man. Like
Mhm.
those labels, identities, like don't really,
Mhm.
I just don't resonate with them. Like they don't define
Mhm.
me.
Mhm.
And so I started identifying as non-binary and use they them pronouns. Um, and I started joking with my ex-husband that maybe he was gay too because
Mhm.
because I was non-binary. He didn't really like that at all. And then I started
Mhm.
questioning like, you know, man, I've done this whole gendered thing to my children. Um, and I don't know if I can like put the cat back in the bag or not, because like we had already done the whole thing of like using gendered pronouns, and like I even did a gender reveal for my youngest. So like we had done all that stuff, and I was like, okay. So I just started, reading books about gender identity to them and
Mhm.
talking about how some people are identify as a man or a woman or both, and like showing them stories and pictures of like trans people and things like that, so that they would
Mhm.
just know like this is a thing that exists. That's all. Um, and then I, I guess I started feeling like nobody around me knew that I was queer.
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
everybody, I just kind of seemed like a straight cis woman. Like that's what people saw. And
Mhm.
in some ways, that's the performance that I was giving.
Mhm.
And it just started to feel like wrong to me. I was like, this doesn't feel true. Like it feels like I'm lying to people, even though
Mhm.
I'm just being,
Yeah. Yeah.
because people don't know. And so I remember coming out to somebody just randomly. I was like, sometimes you really look like my ex-girlfriend. And they were like, wait, what? Like you have an ex-girlfriend? Like, excuse me? So I just started like telling people that I was queer. And of course, like being non-binary is one way to tell people.
Mhm.
Um, but like I'm still married to a man. And so anyway, we basically decided to open up our relationship, and we decided to try and see if like polyamory might be a thing that worked for us. And we started exploring that. And in that process, I really began to realize like the relationship agreements that we had made and the
Mhm.
boundaries that I had. And I started to think about like, what do I really want in a relationship?
Mhm.
Um, and like, what are the things that help me feel fulfilled? And so as we had these conversations and as we were talking, and we eventually began to speak with a therapist as well, it just became very clear that what we wanted in a relationship was very, very different, and
Mhm.
that we weren't compatible. And we were trying to make it work because we have kids and we have this life together, but it's like at the end of the day, like you're not going to feel fulfilled if you stay in this kind of relationship.
Mhm.
And I had grown up in a family where my parents were not in love; they were just together for mostly religious and like raising children purposes. And
Mhm.
like I always knew that they weren't in love, and I had always told myself like I am not gonna do that. That is not gonna be me. And then I was like, oh great, that's what I'm doing.
Mhm.
There was this moment of like, I'm not keeping that promise that I made to myself. So yeah, so we separated and divorced. That was 2.5 years ago. I want to say, yeah, so it was after COVID. I think it was 2022.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, so and it was like for the most part very amicable, like
Hmm.
compared to a lot of people that we know who've been through the divorce process. We did it very well. We didn't go to court at all. Um, Mostly because I was willing to make a lot of compromises.
Yeah.
Because just to like keep it peaceful and like not have to deal with lawyers and judges and all that stuff, which honestly I couldn't afford.
Right.
Um, and so we went through that process, and then um, the children were with me in the beginning and going to a school where I taught at. And then when Rowan graduated from that school, because it was only for kindergarten, preschool age, we decided that Rowan should go to the school in Virginia,
Hmm.
mostly because it was more affordable, and also because it was commutable for Matt. Like he could
Hmm.
drive from his house to get there, but for me to get there was just going to be a lot. It was like an hour away, and DC traffic is ridiculous. So
Hmm.
we made that decision. So Rowan started living with his dad, and Addie was living with me, my youngest.
Hmm.
Um, and we did that for one school year. And then during the summers, we basically like swapped them like every week.
Hmm.
Um, Except it wasn't exact because I was teaching summer camp and they did go to summer camp with me.
Hmm.
Um, and then we moved up here, and I had wanted to take them with me. And part of the reason I moved up here is because
Sure.
their whole family lives here on their dad's side.
Hmm.
So we'd been coming up here for years to
Hmm.
visit.
So up
But
here, can we clarify where is up here?
sorry, to Maine. Yeah, so I moved to Maine from
Okay.
Virginia.
Mhm.
I'm like talking to you because I know you
Yeah,
know,
right,
but I
exactly.
forget that
But
we
yeah.
have an audience who doesn't know. Yeah, so I had been coming up to Maine for, 7 years with the kids,
Hmm.
and just realizing like it's a beautiful place. People are very connected here. There's very community centered mindset, and
Hmm.
very, very different from the DC area. So I was like, I just want to like get some land and basically set up a community so that the children have that option. Like as
Hmm.
they grow up, they feel like they have a community in Maine, um, that they can always go to. That was kind of my vision. It's still my vision, but
Hmm.
like I had been hoping that I could bring them with me.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, their dad was like, "No, I want to keep them here." Um, and I did contact a lawyer just to see like, could I bring them with me? And they were like, "You're never going to win that case."
Hmm.
It's really hard to separate parents from each other, especially when you're moving them away from the place that they grew up.
Hmm. Hmm.
Particularly also because I did not have a traditional house. So
Right.
like
Hmm.
I'm living in a yurt, and there is a farmhouse here that we have access to, but we don't actually live in the farmhouse, and there's a lot of other people who live here.
Hmm.
Um, so it's like my housing situation would not look good in a courtroom situation.
Hmm.
Um, and they would likely say that like Matt has the more stable like house
Hmm.
environment. Um, so yeah, that's how it landed. This is the first year that I've been away from the children. So
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
just moved here, and we moved here in August. The kids were with me for the rest of August, and then they went back for school in Virginia, and they were with me at Christmas time for that winter break. And I've been traveling to see them roughly like once a month. It works out some that there's like something
Hmm.
happening.
Hmm.
So I was just there in March for the birthdays.
Hmm.
Um, and then before that, I was there for a play and parent teacher conferences in February. So
Hmm.
yeah, it's been working out that way, but it is quite a lot
I
because
was
it's
gonna say, how is that working out for you?
yeah, it's a lot
Hmm.
to juggle. I feel like
Hmm.
um there's just been a lot. And I came up here originally to work at a Waldorf school, and I
Mhm.
was kind of part of the reason I was working there was because they have free tuition, and I was
Mhm.
hoping that that would help, bring the kids up here eventually. Um, but as I was working there, I and the whole thing started happening in Palestine.
Mhm.
I became very concerned that nobody was talking about what was
Yeah.
happening,
Yeah.
even just amongst the faculty. But it seemed like because I was new there, right? It's like a new school. I don't
Mhm.
know these people. I don't know their culture. Um, but like they're not talking about what's happening.
Right.
And that to me feels like, well, if they're not talking about it, I'm not supposed to talk about it because, I'm just like reading the room, basically.
Right.
Um, but it started to feel like as the conflict got worse, like into like November and December, it was like, okay, there's like thousands and thousands of people who are dead and like
Yeah.
no still nobody's talking about it. So I started participating in strikes, and there's like a really big Palestinian movement here in Maine. I
Mhm.
was very surprised by
Mhm.
um a lot of elderly folks too. But
Mhm.
basically they were organizing protests and all kinds of stuff, and I was like, um okay, like I'm just going to join in and do my thing. But it started to kind of spill over into school because if I'm going on strike,
Mhm. Mhm.
they've got to find a substitute teacher, which actually I had to do, which is very odd to me.
Mhm. Yep.
Um, and then I was like, I was in class, and one of the parents came in the next day after I had gone on strike and was like, "Oh, I'm glad you're feeling better." And I was thinking, like,
Mhm.
did they think I was sick? Nobody told them? Like,
Mhm. Mhm.
and it felt again like I was lying, even though I
Right.
didn't say, I was just, oh, thanks, like I didn't actually lie, but it didn't feel genuine to me
Right.
because I'm like, but I wasn't sick. You don't know why I wasn't here.
Yeah, especially since you're
Um,
passionate about something as well too, and yeah,
yeah.
you gotta hide
And
hide
like,
that part of yourself. Mhm.
yeah, taking care of people's children, especially their little children, um, is a very like intimate thing to do.
Mhm.
So I had been, I mean, and some of these people had like volunteered and helped me build the yurt. Like they were
Mhm.
there helping me on the weekends, and like we had built what I thought was a friendship, and I thought we were like
Mhm.
in community. And I'm like, okay, so as you know, when you've built enough trust, you can move into a place of dissent and like
Mhm.
move through that.
Yeah.
So I was starting to feel like ready for that. I was like, all right, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Um, so I brought it up to the leadership of the school, and
Mhm.
I was like, I think I'd like to have a conversation about this, just to talk about like how we're gonna, if we're even gonna talk about it at all. And there were a few people on the faculty who were very grateful that I had brought it up because they
Mhm.
had felt like they wanted to say something, but they weren't sure if they could.
Mhm.
So I wasn't the only one feeling that way. Um, but what the decision was, and we only talked about it for an hour, which to me like was not enough time. But the
Right.
decision was basically like, well, we think that this is a divisive issue, and
Mhm.
there's valid points on both sides, and we're just not going to get involved. Like we're not going to even like
Mhm.
if we get involved and mention anything, we don't want to take sides, that kind of stuff.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so I was like, I I understood what they were saying, but I was also like, I don't really see this as a side thing.
Yeah.
Like from my perspective, it's not about being two-sided. It is
Yeah.
about whether it is okay to do what Israel's doing or not.
Yeah.
Like, is
Yeah.
it okay to kill so many civilians? I don't care why, just
Mhm.
like at all.
Mhm. Mhm.
um, and if you want to get into the history, we can go there. Not right now, but just like I was saying that to them,
Right.
like
Mhm.
we can go there. I read the Hundred Years' War because of what was happening, because I was
Mhm.
like, I need to understand what is going on over there.
Yeah.
Um, and it helped me a lot. I was like, oh, okay. So
Mhm.
now I can like speak intelligently about this. But essentially what I was saying to them was like, there's no sides when it comes to killing 10,000 children. Like
Yeah.
it's just not right. You can't do
Mhm.
that. And they need to be held accountable. And so I was I just decided that for the last strike of December, it was a global strike, and
Hmm.
instead of me like not showing up to work, I was like, why don't I raise awareness? Because the call from wherever it came from, I don't know if it came from Bisan or somebody, they were
Hmm.
like, instead of striking and calling out of work, we want you
Hmm.
to strike at work.
Hmm.
And I was like, I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
I'm kind of
Yeah.
new
Wow.
to the whole strike thing.
Hmm.
But what the way I interpreted it, and the idea that I came up with, which I felt inspired by, and that's kind of how I know when something is like the right thing to do,
Hmm.
is when I feel inspired by like a creative idea.
Hmm.
I was like, oh, okay, let's have like a holiday party.
Hmm.
And the parents can come, and it's basically encouraging the parents to like stand in solidarity with us and like
Hmm.
come in and just hang out with your kid for the day.
Hmm.
And then essentially like I'm still there, and if they need childcare, I'm still going to be there, but like if they want, they can participate. And so I sent out an email just explaining like this is what we're doing and this is
Hmm.
why.
Hmm.
And I didn't go into a lot of detail about what's happening in Palestine. I just said like we're doing this to support the strike that's happening, the global
Hmm.
strike. I
Hmm.
mean, I don't think any of these people knew that there was a global strike. Like they're
Right. Yeah.
very in their bubble, right?
Yep. Yep.
And
And
so,
even if they
yeah,
do, the way it's been politicized in our media as well, too, and
yeah,
if it wasn't already polarized, it's being polarized even more. But please continue your
exactly.
story. Yes, after you
Yeah,
sent that invitation out. Hmm.
yeah. So I sent that email and immediately got pushback from the leadership.
Hmm.
They were, first of all, like, why did you send that email without clearing it with us first?
Hmm.
Um, and they after I went into school that day, we had the party. One person stayed
Hmm.
for a little while. Um, None of the other parents responded to my email. And
Hmm.
according to the director, one of the parents actually wanted to leave the school because of
Oh
my email.
wow. Hmm. Hmm.
Hmm. So I was like, okay. And they put me on administrative leave, which again new to me. I was like, I don't know what this means, but it basically means that they don't know what to do with me. So they're like,
Hmm.
putting me over here. I can't come to work. I can't do my job. I still get paid, but like I'm not doing anything. I'm just like waiting for them to decide what they
Hmm.
want to do with me.
Wow.
Um, yeah, in the interim, I talked to some people. So yeah, I went home in tears that day, just like,
Hmm.
wow, okay, this just happened. It certainly felt like I had been fired, but I hadn't been. But I had this feeling like this is over. Like
Hmm.
I don't think I can work with these people because the way that they responded was to me violent. Like
Yeah.
instead of talking with me about it, which like they did talk with me about it, but it was in a very like um not pejorative way, but like when you're chastising someone, it was
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
Um and like they were like, I don't understand why you don't understand that you did something wrong. And I'm like, no, I
Hmm.
what I did was right.
Hmm.
But like not what you wanted me to do,
Right.
certainly.
Hmm.
Um, and so yeah, it was rough. I decided to resign
Hmm.
gracefully because I was like, I would rather not be fired. It's not a thing that has ever happened to me.
Hmm.
Um, and I just felt like I can't go back. So that was a tough decision though, because financially, like I'm pretty dependent on that. I was pretty dependent on that job.
Hmm.
And as a teacher, you get like the summers off, but you still get paid.
Yep.
And so I was giving that up knowing that like I have my kids in the summer.
Hmm.
So it's like, how am I going to be able to work? And I'm like, I don't know, but this is what I have to do.
Yeah.
So
And on
we're
top
just
of
going to
that,
act now. And
yeah, on top of that, also to find more work too, there's that issue that comes up as well too. So having to explain it or having to having to relive all of that again too. So
hmm
there's repercussions of that kind of that kind of behavior, that kind of incident that someone with power over kind of they made things a lot more difficult.
Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah, and I will say that nobody has asked me like what happened.
mhm,
The closest thing was just like me kind of saying like, yeah, I just realized that we just weren't in alignment and
mhm.
I needed to move on. Um, so yeah, I think I was relating that back to your question, but I
Mhm.
may have gotten lost along the way.
Yeah, yeah. No, we were just kind of following the stream as where you've been in the last 5 years as well. But no, what's alive for me at the moment too is having this kind of discord within the educational system. Um,
Hmm.
in your estimation, what needs to change with our educational system, or what changes would you like to see?
Um, I think the most fundamental change that I would like to see is teachers being empowered to um, design their own curriculum the way that they, based on the children that are in front of them.
Hmm.
I'm really strong proponent of emergent curriculum, which is
Yeah.
where, you know, the curriculum literally emerges from the people who are
Hmm.
in front of you, what they want to do, what they're interested in, what their gifts are.
Yes.
Um, and it requires a lot of creativity and
Hmm.
imagination to be that kind of teacher. There's no like script to
Hmm.
follow.
Yeah.
So in a way, it's like a
Mhm.
high bar. Um, but I think in a lot of other ways, it would just benefit everyone.
Mhm.
Um, I also would like to see teachers respected and paid the same as doctors,
Mhm.
at least,
Mhm. Mhm.
because as we saw from the pandemic, essential workers are the ones who are the least paid in this
Yeah.
country for some reason. So yeah, childcare and teaching in general, I think needs to be paid a lot more.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's difficult when there is in a lot of cases, first of all, the centralized system of our government kind of consolidating power and telling you what is appropriate and what is not appropriate and not allowing for emergence. And then even when you look at privatization, the market as well too. There's that hierarchy as well there, where there are secrets and there are aspects that are just not shared and not disclosed. One example I always like to give when I led a group discussing about fiduciary, the monetary system and fiduciary interests. I talked to a university professor, and he had no idea what the concept of dark money was. And that was kind of like a wake up call. It's like, okay, there's something, even at that high level education, even at that high level of university education, there's information that you're just not allowed to talk about and to explore. And then when you look at the decentralized, where I think we're going, the decentralized power structures, leadership structures, where we start to return to natural law. We're talking about what our friend Tom produced for us or shared with us recently, a return to natural law, which is really about setting up decentralized systems where everybody is valued for their contribution, everybody is valued for their gifts, and even valued for the process it takes for emergence. And I think that's what's been
Hmm.
devalued a lot in our system is that the process for emergence has completely been has completely been shoved under the rug. It's been devalued, and there's ways to change that, and I'm looking forward to exploring more on how to bring more people to the table. And I notice this is something I struggle with, and I'm wondering if it's something you struggle with as well too, especially with proprietary interests, people who are in business and marketing and all that. I tend to bump up against them quite a bit because because I have an understanding of how decentralized systems work. So, oftentimes I get labeled Marxist, communist, and all of this in a derogatory sense because they mean it as an insult. And I'm trying to back off of my confrontational nature. I've been very confrontational a lot of my life, but really trying to bring more people to the table to discuss the differences between the market, the state, and the commons, where the market is not dominating the conversation. That's where I'm trying to help them understand that we're part of an entire ecosystem. We're part of an entire we're in a symbiotic relationship with each other, and I'm trying not to antagonize people in the market as much. I'm trying to bring them to the table and say, no, you have something just as valuable as the rest of us. How do we have this conversation? So, we have a couple minutes left, and I'd like to ask you about just some of the observations you've made, some of the work and the research you've already done. I'd like you to speak a little bit about that post that you've made a couple of days ago as well, too, about the spirituality or religion, kind of keeping them in control. So I just threw a lot at you. I'm doing a lot of reflection and a lot of a lot of bringing in some commonalities that I'm intuiting with both of our stories. But I'd like to hear, I'd like to hear, kind of what your experience has been when making political or economic or educational observations, just whatever is alive for you in this moment that comes up for you.
Yeah, I mean, as you were talking, I was thinking about how capitalism is kind of like a religion in
Yeah.
and of itself.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that in whatever ways that the mainstream religion, and I'm gonna say like the mainstream religion at the time of original like colonization, like
Mhm.
when things are really taking off. I think that history and like having a historical perspective is so important
Yeah.
because if we just look at things the way they are right now and try to make sense of it, um, we're gonna miss a lot of the nuance and like the reasons why things are the way they are. So I'm always thinking like, okay, where did this come from? Why are we doing this? How did that evolve, right? And so when I think about capitalism, I can't not think about colonization and the taking of natural resources for free, essentially like stealing them from people, and not valuing the way that people are living or using those resources and like just trying to extract a profit out of it. Um, and so the ways in which Christianity is aligned with capitalism or the ways that they can like insert themselves into the religion, particularly there's a lot of like biblical passages about slaves being obedient to their masters and things like that. So that was all used in during time of slavery in this country to like justify it and like keep the slaves in their place. Um, and so that's just one example, but like as we move along, like there's um a lot of the way that the the Bible talks about like respecting authority, and giving to Caesar what is Caesar's and that sort of stuff. So like there's a lot of ways that capitalism and the mainstream can essentially co-opt religion and religious texts and like use them to keep power over people. But particularly in that book that I was reading, it was the Why Don't the Poor Rise Up? And from their perspective, they were talking about how giving people the viewpoint that, oh, we're just living for heaven, like that's the ultimate goal, somewhere not on this planet, and essentially demonizing poverty, and saying like, well, you just don't have enough faith if you don't have a bunch of money. There's a bunch of like prosperity teachers out there in Christianity that are very much like God is going to bless you, and what does that mean? It means money. Um, and so yeah, there's this sense of like we're gonna trap people in this ideology of like somehow equating like money and blessing from God. I'm not gonna necessarily say money is God, but like it's right there. So close.
The amount of times I heard "I love money" is something that comes up for me, and if God is love, and there's these proponents of saying I love money, then
Hmm.
it's not a far stretch to kind of see money, God as money.
Yeah. Well, and like when you're looking to get your needs met, and in, you know, before capitalism, which is a long time ago,
Hmm.
people looked to the gods to meet their needs, and they looked at like, okay, are the crops doing well? It's because we have God's favor.
Hmm.
Um, and so it's not a complete stretch to be like, well, you know, the stock market is God now because like all of our needs are met through money essentially.
Hmm.
Um, and I would say increasingly so. Like it's increasingly hard to build community in a way that is going to help you get all your needs met. And so things that used to be free, that we used to just do for each other, become commodified. And
Yeah,
then people have to rely on the market for those things. Um, yeah, so it's definitely all connected.
yeah. Two things come up for me with that too. Just understanding kairotic flow. We use the metaphor of kind of like liquid capital being like water, where the
Hmm.
market is focused on creating watering cans, bigger, better, more technologically advanced watering cans to help the flow of money. The state is kind of like the piping system, where they're creating pipes to hopefully and equitably get the resources to everyone. Although there's a lot of clogs in those pipes. The commons is is compared to the rain. And if it's not raining, doesn't
Mm.
matter. It doesn't matter how good your watering cans are. It doesn't matter how efficient your piping system is. There's a drought. There's a drought, and we say
Yeah.
corruption is what happens when power is allowed to pull and stagnate, and there's not a gradual handing off of power.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's a lie for me in that. In my ministry studies, I'm studying the Aquarian Gospel of Jesus Christ. Are you familiar with it?
No.
Well, the Aquarian Gospel, the reason why it really speaks to me is because it's channeled information that tells the story of Jesus between the time of his birth and to the ministry in the gospel. So there's the narrative that he traveled around the world, learned from all of the other religious and spiritual schools, masters from around the world, and the the Jesus of the Aquarian Gospels is even more is even more in the face of the of the doctors and the lawyers and the money makers and whatnot, and even more against war. There was already I'm halfway through it now. There's already been 3 incidents where he's talked about breaking the sword and
Mm.
really being criticized, really critical of capital of what capitalism is. Very critical of it. So for where I'm looking to explore why it it is fascinating to me is that there's a bridge there because there's still the gospel, according to the Bible, that's all still present there. But what it also does is it addresses natural, there's a lot of natural law. A lot of, the Jesus of the Aquarian gospel, it was very much natural law. And what I'm seeing in fundamentalist areas in our country that are very fundamentalist, there is, there is a lot of poverty, there is a lot of economic underdevelopment, and there is a very limited access to good mental health care. So what is alive for me in all of this is that it seems like when you look at like the New Age movement, or you look at some of the thought leaders or whatnot, it almost seems like it's a commercialization of natural law, where
Mm,
yeah, so when you get away from the commercialization and return to the natural law, you're getting back to more of the foundation of what what the Jesus of the Bible might have really been trying to get to before that was outsourced and before that was edited at the Council of Nicaea. So so that's just what's alive for me as I'm as I'm looking at how religious tribalism has emerged out of these economic ideologies, and yeah, so it's just something that was alive for me since hearing your your reading of Why Don't the Poor Rise Up. And the Jesus of the Aquarian Gospel especially was very was you know was was actually threatened by, when he went to India. He was very critical of the caste system, and
yeah,
the wealthy in India were about ready to kill him for his criticisms of it. But he was
I'm
able
sure.
to, yeah. But his hosts there was able to have him, live amongst the poor and live amongst the slave class. And that's where he started telling, where a lot of his parables came from, where he was talking about uh, where he was, really came to the conclusion that the meek really will inherit the earth. And
Mm,
the more you follow your heart, and the more you are, truly expressing unconditional love, we get back to these decentralized systems under natural law. And I think there's more of us coming into our truth now, that we can speak from our hearts, and we can kind of get past some of this, some of these power we can see these power games, we can see these power struggles for what they are, and really transcend these sociopathic systems.
yeah, for sure.
Mm.
Yeah. It's wild that you were talking about the ideology
Mhm.
of Christianity, and it just for some reason brought to mind people who are what I would call social Christians, and
Mhm.
like the tribalism, right? It's like I'm going to be part of this club. It's like a social group, right? And I definitely remember growing up there being this distinction between those people and us. It was like we are the real followers of Christ. Those people are just like, doing it for show. Like they're just there, they're showing up, but they don't actually take the teachings of Christ to heart.
Mhm.
And it's just fascinating to me that even that, like, there's a divide, like within Christianity, but also like in society, of
Mhm.
like the real Christians and the not real Christians.
Mhm.
Um, and in some ways, I think that distinction for bringing me here, because when I look back and when I have very few and far between conversations with my father, who is still a Christian,
Mhm.
um, he I often will say to him, like, you radicalized me, right? Like you and Jesus.
Yeah.
um, I like I don't understand why you're surprised, because of course I would reject capitalism, and of course I would, you know, want to care about the earth and the poor, and like
Mhm. Yeah.
why would I do anything different? Isn't that
Mhm.
what you always wanted?
Mhm.
Was for
Mhm.
me to be like Christ.
There you go. Yeah.
So yeah,
All right. Well, we have gone for over an hour here, Ray. It goes by so quickly, so quickly.
I
So,
know. We could definitely
yeah,
talk about so much more, but
yeah. No, I
um
think this was to me, I really see this as, I mean, I think this to me is kind of like even building more of a foundation because of what's coming up, and where we're going to be going as well too, with exploring integrity as well. That I think there's a yeah, I think there's going to be, I really hope there's going to be more of these foundational conversations, because because really helping people have the real authentic conversations, especially around religion and spirituality, I think is the makings for being able to really shift, really initiate this paradigm shift or these societal shifts. So, so I'm very, very grateful for this, and I'm learning a lot, and I want to learn more from you, because yeah, no, you have a wealth of of very practical, full of wisdom, life lessons here, and I'm looking forward to exploring more with you.
Thanks, Michael.
Great.
I'm gonna be looking up that Aquarian
Yeah, the Aquarian
uh,
gospel. Yeah,
gospel as well.
yeah, yeah. That's where. Yeah, that's what's is kind of like the foundational document of the ministry training that I'm currently exploring. So
Hmm.
so yeah,
Great. Well,
so
thanks
to
for
be
the
continued.
conversation.
Yeah, absolutely, Ray. And I am going to turn off the recording.